Hello and welcome to The Exchange, where we invite leaders in their field to join us to discuss topics of interest to all of us in our everyday lives. I'm Rob Buckingham and my co-host on The Exchange is my wife, Christie.
Yes, I'm looking forward to today's topic because we've had 20 years of marriage and I'm hoping we have at least another 20.
Oh, absolutely. And it's still alive.
Absolutely. But I want to know today, and we're going to be talking about keeping our marriage alive after having kids. Parenthood can be consuming, so how do we keep the marriage cooking?
To discuss this topic, we're delighted to be joined by Alix Bradfield, who is a former relationships counsellor for 12 years. Welcome, Alix.
Thank you, Rob. Hello, Christie. Great to be here.
Alix. Great one. We're also joined by Paul Wiseman, who has over 20 years experience in counselling and currently works for Relationships Australia. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, Christie. Hello, Rob. Glad to be here.
Before we start our discussion, let's take a look at this.
Being a good parent is a full-time job and doesn't leave much time for anything else. It's easy to let the romance slip while raising kids, but it's important to keep your romance alive and remember why you got married in the first place.
So, keeping the marriage alive after having kids.
Yeah, Paul, what would you say are the main things to do with what are the stressors that people face when they have kids?
Well, I think it's incredibly daunting, for couples, and they come home from the hospital with the baby, or some cases more than one. I've got a client at the moment where they've got quads.
Wow.
So, very daunting. But I think, the challenge really is in terms of trying to move from being a couple to the baby and trying to work out how they share the responsibilities around that. Shane Warne actually said a really interesting thing some years ago, where he said that he couldn't understand fathers that didn't get in there and sort of change nappies and things like that. And I don't often agree with Shane, but on that point, I'd have to concede that, it was a really valuable comment that, fathers need to get in and mothers need to make space for them to come in and, both sort of work on it.
I totally agree with that. I've loved interacting with my kids, changing nappies in all sorts of places, and it's wonderful. Alix, what would you add to that?
One of the things I'm thinking about even with that is that from the beginning there might be a different way of approaching this new baby. And how useful it would have been if the couple had actually sat down before they were bringing the baby home in the little cot, and talk about, well, what do you think a baby is going to mean to us, and what did you like about the way your mum and dad brought you up, and how would you like it to be different?
Absolutely. And nowadays people often don't have much to do with a baby, unlike when I was growing up, we would play with little babies. I mean, think about it now, they're not toys, but we had, as teenage girls, we had a lot to do with babies, whereas now sometimes a baby, their own baby, is the first baby that anyone has looked after.
And how much have they thought about it? How much have they talked about it beforehand? That might help.
Yeah, and I think that another part of that point, Alix, is around, the fact that each parent has a different way of thinking about and doing it, and how can they support each other around that difference, and value that, and not sort of one person's way is better than the other. And I think that's really helpful as well.
So you're saying resolve some of these issues before the kids actually arrive.
At least air them. At least
talk
air
about them. I'm not sure how much resolving you can do beforehand, but you can certainly get some of those cards on the table.
What would be some of the issues that you would see, Alix, that they would need to resolve first?
Well, I'm just hearing about changing nappies, for instance. What does that mean to both parents who have never had any experience in changing nappies?
It needs to be done at least 8 or 9 times a day.
So it's just the sort of thing to talk about beforehand. I think it's always good with any potential conflict to talk about it outside the difficulty beforehand, if possible, when there isn't tension around it, and it hasn't got to the point. I had a couple many years ago in marriage counselling that I will never forget, because she came in and said, no, I'm sure my maths are wrong here, but she said tersely, I have changed 45 nappies this week. He has changed 32 or whatever it was.
Yes.
And they were keeping score. Now that really wasn't about working together too well either.
No, absolutely. And things like bathing and getting up in the night have got to be discussed as well.
Who's going to be sleepless? Are you both going to be sleepless? Are you going to share the sleeplessness?
That's right. And the more that those things can be shared between, not only does it sort of lighten the load, but it makes a big difference, I think, both for the couple but also for the child, you know, to have both parents in there, you know, doing all of that stuff.
I mean, certainly for us, we looked at the practicalities from survival perspective, you know, and Rob was, I wanted him to be safe on the roads when he was driving, and I was going to be staying at home during the day, so one of us did get sleep, you know, and
it was me.
Some people, they want both people doing everything, and then you've got two exhausted parents, and that might not work either.
But that's the sort of thing, if you discuss, you might well come up with that as a solution, at least for a certain period of time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Paul, how many children do you have?
I've got 2 daughters who are sort of in their late teens, early 20s.
Okay.
So you know, I went through this some years ago.
Thinking back those years then, how did your marriage change when your daughters arrived?
Well, the biggest thing was that neither of them were great sleepers, so they didn't sleep a whole lot day or night. So in terms of your comment, Christie, about, you know, who gets the sleep, well, one of the issues for us was when they would invariably wake up, you know, on more than one occasion during the course of the night and not settle. Then one of the things we did was that I would spend a lot of time driving, walking around the suburban streets of Thornbury, just both to give my wife a bit of a break, but also, you know, so they would eventually go to sleep, only to wake up again when you pulled up in front of the house. But that's another story.
And speaking of stories, someone said to me once, did we know the rule about the later you happen to go to sleep, the earlier the children wake up?
There you go. Sleep begets sleep, I think.
Well, there's something about thinking they're going to stay. They might wake up a little. No.
Doesn't work that way. No. Alix, what about you? How did your marriage change when your kids arrived?
Well, it changed dramatically. We had no family around to help. I knew nothing about babies. I'm an only child, so I had no idea what babies did, and I was reading everything I could get my hands on, and it was quite I think my husband, in those days, the husband continued to do what the husband did, and that was be a very good provider, and so I was pretty much on my own. Now that's changed amazingly over the generation, and I love seeing fathers involved, and I think it's made for much closer relationships with both parents and their children.
Yeah. It has indeed. Relationships evolve, as we've already said. Is it naive to think that our relationships are going to be the same after children arrive?
I think it is naive. I think it is naive, and it always helps with what happens if you've got realistic expectations, and that might mean going to someone else's house who has babies and young children. Of course, what you'll say to yourself at that point
I
is,
won't do that.
You know, why don't they do something about that 2-year-old? You know, well, until you've got one running around, you think you're going to be more in charge. Also, if you're a professional, and you order your life, and your BlackBerry has everything in order in your diary, and meetings run on time, you have no idea what it's going to be like. It's quite difficult when you find this screaming little person you're responsible for.
That's so true. I was a great parent until I had kids.
Yes, exactly.
There is a tension, though, I think, between how much you want, or how much life does change, and how much sort of continues on, albeit slightly differently. And I think that because some parents, the whole world changes 195 degrees, and it becomes all about the children and when they're sleeping, and life becomes incredibly constraining. And I think sometimes, you know, I'm not sure whether parents kind of do themselves or their children a lot of favours if it's too rigid.
Exactly.
And you want a bit of flexibility.
Because babies are portable.
Well, that's right. And, you know, there are porta cots, and, you know, part of sort of babies growing in the world, of course, is to take them out into the world. And, you know, often one of the roles, I think, between parents is that mums will often provide a lot of stability at home, and fathers will often do a lot of taking kids to the park and kicking the football, and, you know, more sort of external, out in the world kind of activities. And that can be a good sort of mix often too, you know, between the parents, offering their kids different things. But you don't want the world to become some completely different thing. You know, you need a bit of mixture of both.
Very true. It just takes you 2 hours to be spontaneous, doesn't it?
That's right.
When children come along.
And then you're just about to walk out the door and you have a massive nappy to deal with.
Yeah.
Or just to be able to walk out the door.
Yeah,
the way
just
you
walk
know.
out the door.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. No, very true.
And I think another part of that is that, you know, each parent can actually give each other some time away, so that, you know, dads can have some time at home with the children while mum's out you know, having coffee or doing whatever, and vice versa. And I think that that's another way where, you know, some of life can continue to be the same, because parents, you know, do need to do some of that, not just around work, but socially as well.
Totally. So working together as a partnership. We need to take a break, but we'll be right back with more discussion here on The Exchange. Welcome back to The Exchange. We're having an insightful discussion with Alix Bradfield and Paul Wiseman about how to keep your marriage alive after having kids.
Absolutely we are. Tell us, Alix, some of the things that you would see erode romance after having kids.
How about fatigue?
Yeah,
How
that's
about
a big
waking
one.
up on, and I read somewhere that the way to prepare for a new baby is to set an alarm every 2 hours and then try to get to sleep in between that 2 hours, but of course you don't, because the alarm's going off in 2. If you do that for a few nights in a row, you get a little bit of an idea of what goes on with a newborn baby. So fatigue has a big erosion factor, and I guess we just have to bear through that, because you've got this little miracle in front of you, who's very precious and amazing, you know. So it just has to be dealt with.
That would be the number one thing to... Would you add anything to that, Paul?
Well, I would add to that sort of feeling unsupported. I think we commented on some of that earlier, that, you know, when one or both partners don't feel that whatever the contribution they're doing, whether it's mum at home and dad at work, or how they're divvying it up, or vice versa. I mean, you often have, you know, both parents at home for some of the time, and particularly, you know, once the baby's a little bit older. But I think if they feel... If one or both are not feeling particularly supported by the other, then that's obviously going to have an impact as well.
Absolutely.
And that can can happen for both. They can both begin to feel, I'm doing more of the hard yards here, and you're not coming to the party, or I'm feeling excluded, or so both can be shaken by this trio that was a couple.
And on that, like, this mum is often besotted, and the dad besotted by a baby, but there's different ways of being besotted, and often the guy's thinking, well, my life now is about, every conversation is about nappies, and so that can erode romance as well.
And I remember one of my brothers, I've got quite a few brothers, saying that when him and his wife first went out after having, might have been their first or second, I can't remember, and that they were sitting across the table from each other and just talking about the baby or children, and they'd kind of lost contact with, you know, more of their relationship together, and it was a little bit of a light bulb moment for them, and they realised that, you know, they had to reclaim some of that.
So is that being deliberate, having a date night and all of that kind of thing, or is this just impossible when kids come along?
No, I think it's incredibly important that couples do, if they can, whether it's a date night or just some time from time to time, you know, where it is just them. So whether that's, you know, kids being babysat, but some time away, you know, can be incredibly important, and it's so important that couples, you know, value that, and that's as important as anything else, because it does support, you know, the very thing that they're trying to do.
Well, you've heard from our experts. Let's see what the people on the streets have to say.
What do you think are the major changes to a relationship once children come on the scene?
Lack of sex.
Well, all of your attention focuses in different areas. So you just have to really readjust and compromise in your life. So your time is so totally taken up.
Well, I think it's you have less time for your partner, and you also have a lot of time when you do have spare, you want to sleep.
Basically, you have children, and your focus is no longer only your wife or your spouse. It's also you got to spend your time between your spouse and your children.
Look, I think probably one of the biggest things is the level of responsibility changes as a couple. Obviously, there's financial responsibilities as well, considering that obviously you're probably having to project a 20-year lifespan with kids from birth to leaving home and setting themselves up. In terms of how it changes a relationship, I think that most, and I'm not a parent myself at this stage, but I think a lot of parents probably don't sort of envisage the, I guess, the sacrifices you've got to make as a parent as well.
I think you lose your life as you knew it, and you have to adapt totally. And instead of being yourself, you're now several other people.
I think that people spend all their time with their kids. They don't have time for themselves.
Do you think the spouse should come first or the children should come first?
The children come first, then the poor spouse.
I think the child is the first priority, and yes, the spouse definitely second.
I think the children should come first because the spouse will always understand, surely.
Geez, I think the cliche term is the kids have got to come before the spouse, but at the same time, I think probably in reflecting on that and not being a parent myself, I think that they've probably both got to sit on an equal level because you see a lot where parents sacrifice their own relationship for their children's opportunities and life, that I think they probably arguably need to sit on the same level.
The kids, of course. I mean, even the spouse would agree with that, I think. Trouble is, when does it stop? I mean, mine are a lot older now, and they're still very important to me anyway. But now I suppose you start looking at becoming yourself again after so many years.
Even balance, I think. I'm not sure there's one's before the other, but at least there's a balance. But when people have kids, it looks like they spend all the time on their kids and not themselves.
So what would you recommend in keeping the relationship still, going once kids come along?
Valentine's Day is very nice. Hotel stays. To keep the romance going, you need to get out and enjoy yourselves and get someone else to look after the kids.
Still needs to be a balance of collectively as the family. I think there still always needs to be, admittedly it would be harder to have individual me time, but there also needs to be husband and wife time.
Organised date nights, maybe a weekend away every now and again.
Communication is huge. I think that's the main thing. And how you do that, whether you do it in activities together, you usually have to do it as a whole family anyway, but talking to one another is important.
Joining us now is Street Talk reporter Sandra Cavallo. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Hi, Sandra. That was interesting out in the streets. Well,
totally interesting.
Tell us.
Look, I found it fascinating, particularly the question about who should come first, children or spouse. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you picked it up, all the women said the children, of course, come first. But if you speak to the guys, they would say, well, no, it's kind of equal. The spouse and then the children. So right there, in terms of gender, I notice there's a bit of a discrepancy, and I don't know how that plays out in marriages.
I'm going to put my neck out there and be extremely controversial, and I totally and absolutely disagree with putting the children first. I think it has to be the husband first.
Totally.
What do you guys think?
I totally agree with that.
What do you guys think?
All right, well, this is a very easy topic for me to address because my children are grown up, so I hope people listening will not think that that we're dictating what they should do.
No.
And when you've got a new child, of course, it is all absorbing, but it shouldn't be all absorbing.
Yep.
You really, if you think about the couple, they're the foundation that you start with, and hopefully that carries on long after the children are gone. If that's neglected, if your couple relationship is neglected, the children will suffer because you'll end up stressed, distant from each other.
And the guy without the kids actually made that point. He said, I don't have kids, but I imagine if the couple, their relationship isn't solid rock, then the kids are going to suffer.
Well, that's exactly
and Paul,
the point.
how many couples have you talked to that have said, we're only staying in this marriage until the children are old enough? We're just staying in this marriage because of the children.
Yeah, sometimes it's a factor. I guess what I would add into the equation would be that along with, the importance of time as a couple and obviously in terms of the children, but the additional bit that I would make would be in terms of each individual. And I think that's where the couple can, really help each other out. That they can give, that's one of the things they can give to each other, and that those three areas actually need to be, kept in mind and time made available for.
Tended to.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. It's not actually just, I'm not being harsh and saying you ignore a child, and when children maybe are ill, you put all your effort into there. Please, no letters, Peter. But I've watched my own parents, and I left home when I was 18, and I am so grateful that they had a great relationship because I am an only child. I'm no longer there, and so if they hadn't had a relationship that was based on them as a couple,
And according to one of the people there, all you need's Valentine's Day anyway. So
Annually,
this is my once a year
We
day.
don't even do that because it's so consumer based, but once a year will be fine.
Yeah, we'll just do that. It's in February sometime.
What does seem interesting is that the society does seem to be more child-centric now than it used to be. So parents will be saying to the child on the weekend, what is it that you want to do? What can we do for the children? Rather than thinking, well, what might we want to do? And the children can come along and enjoy it. So do you think that's changed also?
I think I think we certainly focus much more on the children than, I guess, when I was small, a long time ago. And I think that, it is important. I think that parents kind of reclaim some of that, like you say, and that, it's a bit of both. It's important to find out what children might like, but it's also important for kids to know that mum and dad are...
keeping it in balance. Yeah. Sandra, thanks for popping in.
Thank you.
That's great. We'll be back with more of The Exchange in just a moment. Welcome back to The Exchange. We're talking with former marriage counsellor Alix Bradfield and Relationships Australia's Paul Wiseman about keeping the marriage alive after children.
Absolutely. Can you guys give us some of your top tips for doing that?
All right. Christie, I will. I think we've talked a lot about babies, but we can also talk about children. Yes. In terms of putting the focus on the couple, if we agree that that's an important thing to do, even when someone comes home. Now, I saw a comedian give a very, very funny gig on coming home and the dog, and the dog hi to the partner. Yeah. And often we join in with the kids and then the partner.
That's a good point. I've got to remember to wag my tail when you come home.
It's a simple thing to do, is to make sure you greet your partner first. Yeah. Yep. And then the kids. Or if you're talking, if mum and dad are talking and the kids are interrupting, hey, just a minute, we're talking just now. Yeah. So that they gradually understand this is an important relationship.
And that the world doesn't revolve around
which is not good for kids to think they're the centre of attention all the time anyway. Sure.
I think you're tapping into sort of something that's around sort of rituals, and that each couple, takes some responsibility for developing, whether it's, the coming home ritual or the leaving home ritual, or, my parents, my father got up and made mum a cup of hot water first and then a cup of tea in bed for, 50 years of their married life. That was one of their little rituals that they had.
You've only got 30 more to go.
And I think I really often will talk with couples about what rituals they have, or if they were adding to that, what else might they consider, and to sort of just think about it, that it's a valued part of putting some flesh on what romance might be. Yeah. And that it's different for
sometimes it's just those little things, isn't it? Yes. Like I'm nurturing with your dad on that. I'll often bring you a cup of tea in the morning, and just little things like that, and that can.
Or wrap my nightie around a wheat pack. Yes. I mean, those are lovely things.
Yes.
They
really
don't
take a lot of time.
They don't. Yeah. But they're things that are going to
make a difference. And I knew one husband who, when the baby cried, it was time to feed. He got the baby and brought the baby to the mother, because he can't breastfeed. He could bring it to her.
And men are totally useless when it comes to breastfeeding. Well, it was a great discussion today. Thank you, Alix. Thank you, Paul, for joining us on The Exchange.
Thanks, Christie.
And thank you for joining us as well. Please go to our website for a fact sheet on this topic, as well as more information about this show, The Exchange. We look forward to seeing you next time.
See you soon.